Namaste and welcome. The title for today's class is Hearing with Your Heart. It's a very important subject actually. But before I begin, I will offer my obeisances to my spiritual master, Jagat Guru Siddha Swarupananda, to Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, and to Sri Krishna. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutale Srimati Siddha Swarupananda Paramahamsariti Namane Bhaja Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadha Sri Vasudeva Gaur Bhakta Vrindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai Srila Prabhupada. So yes, this class is all about hearing. And as we know, the process in spiritual life begins with hearing. Shravanam means hearing. Kirtanam means repeating. And Vishnava Shmaranam means remembering. Remembering the form of the Lord, remembering the pastimes of the Lord. So there they all are, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnava, Shmaranam. Hearing, repeating, and remembering. But it begins with hearing. So hearing is the beginning of the process. And it remains there the entire time. It's not that you start by hearing and then that, you move on to something else. No, hearing always stays there and it just becomes richer and deeper. So I think a lot of you, I'm going to venture most of you, if you think back on how you began this process in this lifetime of chanting and trying to work towards a loving relationship with Krishna, it began with hearing. So each one of you can probably tag how it began with hearing. And Vedically included in hearing is reading. So somebody might read something and that sparks their interest, and then they investigate more, and then they're eventually hearing more. So for myself, and I've probably told the story before, but very quickly for myself, in the very early 1970s, I think 1972, I was going into the city, Brisbane. Brisbane is a capital city here in Australia, but back in the 70s, it was more like a large country town, not like a capital city. So I was catching the bus into the city to visit one of my friends there who was working in a shop. And when I get off the bus, there's these strange group of guys. There was maybe about 5 or 6 of them. And they all had orange skirts on, no t-shirts or anything. And their hair was all shaven off except for a ponytail. And they had what I thought was mud on their face. I had never heard of ISKCON. I had never heard of Hare Krishnas, nothing at all like that. So this was very visually different to what I was used to. And they were singing a song over and over. And I thought, this is really strange. And this is me, I'm a strange person, but I'm thinking this is very strange. So I crossed the road so I wouldn't be on the same side of the street. And I went to my friend's shop that she worked in. It was kind of like a bit of a hippie shop, sold all those kinds of things in those days. And when I went to walk into her shop, on the front, inside the front window was a piece of cardboard with the Maha Mantra written on it, but I didn't know it as that. And I looked at it and I said to her, "What is that? What are those words?" And she said, oh, well, these guys came and they were selling her incense, and she described them. I said, I know, I saw them. And she said, and one of them wrote that on a piece of cardboard and left it there. I said, oh, it's all very strange, isn't it? And then we just went on talking some other things. So going home to my house later on, an hour or so later on, I'm sitting in the back of the bus, and the bus was actually empty. I was probably the only passenger on. I was right at the very back of the bus, and I actually started singing the Maha Mantra. Of course, I didn't know it properly. I'd only heard it a few times when they were singing in the streets, and I'd seen it written down. So I was probably getting it all mixed up, but still it was Hari and Krishna and Rama. And I started singing them all the way home for about half an hour in that bus. And when it came time for me to get out of that bus, to this day, I swear I wasn't touching the ground when I was walking along to my house. I was so happy. It fascinated me. And so I was determined to find out what those words meant, and specifically, what does Krishna mean? So the very next day I get up and I go back into the city, and I go to the big library where all the university students went to as a study library, reference study library. And I went and looked up Krishna, and I found a reference in this huge book. I found this reference, and to this day my only memory, it probably said a little bit more, but my memory is Krishna has a girlfriend called Radha. What does this mean? So I'm hearing and reading, which is the same as hearing. And fortunately, my husband came the next day, and we went off on a journey, and he had already met a devotee of Krishna. And so we stayed there with this devotee of Krishna for maybe 6 months. And so he not only told us all about Krishna, he not only got us to chant every single day, he was reading the Krishna book, he was reading the Bhagavad Gita to us. It was wonderful. I'd found home. I had honestly found my home, and I never even knew, because previous to this, you think your home is where your parents are. You think your home is wherever you're living. But when I discovered Krishna, I discovered my home. And this devotee, Paranda, who we are eternally indebted to, Paranda not only told us about Krishna, but he would talk a lot about Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada and Siddha Swarupananda. So by hearing about them, this really induced this enthusiasm to want to meet them. So within, I'd say, 6 months of us first hearing about Krishna, we got the opportunity to meet Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami and Siddha Swarupananda, and in 2 separate scenarios within a few weeks. So it all began with hearing, and the rest is history now. So I think everybody would probably have a story like that, where they see a poster, that's hearing, or they hear somebody speaking. So hearing is so important. So hearing is not just of vital value when the soul, the living entity, is in a human form of life, but whenever the soul here in this material world is in any of the forms of life. The fly on the ceiling, dogs, cats, birds, trees, and so on, they all experience wonderful benefits from hearing the chanting, hearing the names of Krishna. Some years ago, my spiritual master would sit under a particular tree at a location when he was speaking on subjects, and he would even lean back against the tree sometimes. But after a while, the location was changed, and he did some speaking in a different place. But he remarked that that tree would be missing hearing and missing doing some service for Krishna. So that tree was very much benefiting from hearing the chanting. The Bhagavad Gita is an amazing example of hearing. You have this situation where Arjuna is just about to go into battle, and he honestly thinks he's got it all together. He honestly thinks he understands everything, how everything operates and that, but still he's feeling, he's feeling wobbly, okay? So he starts talking to Krishna, who's his friend as well as his chariot driver. He starts talking to Krishna about, well, maybe I won't fight in this battle for this reason and this reason and this reason, and this will be the outcome if I do this, and this will be the outcome if I do that. And he's really kind of, proposing to Krishna all the sorts of scenarios, like he understands it all, like he's got it at his fingertips. But then it just comes to a point where he just crashes and burns. It's like he has a breakdown, what people would call a nervous breakdown right now. Right there in front of Krishna, he has this complete breakdown. And it's at that point when he's feeling, I really don't know what I should be doing. I really don't have all the answers. It's at that point that Krishna starts speaking. So then Arjuna is hearing Krishna speaking. And then, of course, Arjuna has these questions, so he then inquires, and Krishna listens. And then Krishna answers him. So it's this perfect dialogue goes on, and it's all based on hearing and then responding to the inquiries. And even the Supreme Lord is listening to Arjuna. It's very, very personal. But it's not only very personal between Krishna and Arjuna. It is very personal conversation that all of us can relate to. And we feel that we're right there. We're right there with Arjuna, and we're asking questions and we're hearing the response from Krishna, the perfect response. So the Bhagavad Gita is like the master class on this process of hearing, Shravanam. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is another example of hearing, another master class in hearing. And this time we don't have the Supreme Person who's speaking and answering questions and hearing the questions and replying. This takes place between a king, King Pariksit, who's about to die in 7 days. So he's very serious about discovering answers to his questions. He doesn't have time, to walk to the Himalayas. He doesn't have time, to sit down with the sages for the next 6 years. He's got 7 days. He's got to find the answers. So he meets this great sage, Sukadeva Goswami. And the very interesting thing is, Maharaj Pariksit, the king, he's not a young man. He's a king. I don't know how old he was, but he was older. But Sukadeva Goswami is only 16. So the king is not accepting Sukadeva Goswami from an external point of view of, he's very elderly, therefore he's very sage-like and he's very wise. No, he was accepting Sukadeva Goswami knows the answers. He is a self-realized soul. So here's this conversation taking place by the banks of the Ganges. And it's not just Sukadeva who's there and the king. All these sages, thousands of sages came there, and they sat there on the banks around because they wanted to hear. They wanted to listen to this amazing conversation that took place for 7 days. 18,000 verses were spoken. So one of those sages that was sitting there, after the whole event had concluded, this sage went back to the Himalayas where his ashram, and there were other sages there at that ashram who hadn't had the opportunity to sit there on the banks of the Ganges and listen to this great dialogue. So he repeated everything that he heard perfectly, and they asked him questions. So you have within the Srimad Bhagavatam these two conversations taking place, because that conversation in the ashram is also included there. So, but it's all based on hearing. So this is more evidence of showing you of really glorifying this process of hearing and how important it is. Now the hearing begins for all living entities who are in the human form. It begins when you're in the womb. So the child within the womb, after about, I think it's around 7 months, they can actually hear. Everything has developed enough in their bodies, they can actually hear when they're in the womb. So Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada wrote in the purports in the Srimad Bhagavatam there, this importance that when a woman is pregnant with her child, that she should read to the child, especially in the later months of the pregnancy. Read to them from scripture and have chanting playing so they can hear the chanting. So that process of hearing begins even when the child is in the womb. And there's that wonderful example that we all have heard about, Prahlad Maharaj, the little boy devotee. And it began when he was in the womb of his mother. And she was at the ashram where Narada Muni was. And he was instructing her in spiritual life. And Prahlad was listening while he was in the womb. So when he was born, he actually retained and acted upon that knowledge that he had heard from Narada Muni. And we know the stories that even when he was 5 years old, he would be talking to all his friends at school and explaining the philosophy to them, which very much angered his father. So this wonderful whole pastime took place, didn't it? But it began with him hearing, even when he was in the womb. So hearing is there right from the start with us. We can be born into a situation where we're not hearing transcendental sounds, we're just hearing material sounds. And it really sort of settles into our consciousness, that it matches up into our consciousness of trying to enjoy here in the material world. Or we may be fortunate enough to hear transcendental sounds even when we're in the womb. There's some religious traditions that when a child is born, the father goes up straight away to the newborn child, and in one ear he says the names of the Supreme Lord, and then in the other ear he again says the names of the Supreme Lord. So the child, the first sounds that he's hearing after he's been born is names of the Supreme Lord. Now, that's a very nice tradition, isn't it? So hearing, as I explained, it's not just there when you're in the womb, when you're very young, throughout your life. The last sense that diminishes is the sense of hearing when a person is dying. So it remains there. A person can be lying on their deathbed and their sense of taste has gone, their sense of smell has gone, their sense of touch has gone, all the senses are going, but the sense of hearing remains until the very end because it is so important that sense of hearing. Because when a person is about to leave their body, they can hear the names of the Supreme Lord. They can hear the chanting. They can be reminded of where their actual sanctuary is at this time of death. And even when a person's in a coma, they can still hear. And it's very important to understand that. Even the doctors know that. That's why they'll have, you sit in the movies or whatever, you see somebody's lying there in a coma and the doctors get the family members to come in. They say, talk to them about anything, bring them out of the coma. And so people sit there talking about all mundane things. Oh, I just planted these things in the garden. You'll have to come and see them when they're growing and blah, blah, blah. No, that's not what the devotees do. The devotees recognize the person is still there in the body and they can still access this hearing process. And so they give them real food, genuine food to nourish them at this time of leaving their body. So from just a little bit of reflection on our sense of hearing, we can really appreciate how important it is. And based on that appreciation, we should physically take care of our sense of hearing. If we work in a job where there's really loud noises, we should wear earplugs. That makes sense, doesn't it? And one of the really common ones is really loud music. We should really protect our ears from loud music, because we don't want to arrive at the end of our life and our sense of hearing is greatly diminished. We really rely upon that as the last comfort to hear Krishna's names as we leave the body. Spiritually, we should really look after our sense of hearing by listening to our spiritual master speaking. And don't listen to things that are quite offensive. So all those things, your hearing can actually bring you closer to Krishna, but if you're not careful, your hearing can take you further away from Krishna. So we're going to finish off now the class with a story from the Krishna book, of course. And this, it's just a little part of the story, extract from the story, and it's really about all the residents of Vrindavan and the sounds that they are hearing. So that's why I chose this story. It's really all about sounds and hearing. Now, if there's any kids out there who are watching this class, if you like, what you could do is every time during the story I say the word hearing, count on your finger. 1, the next time 2. So every time you hear me say the word hear, hearing, or heard, any one of those 3 words, count it on your finger. And let's see how many you come up with at the end of the story. The gopis attracted by the flute. Krishna was pleased with the atmosphere of the forest where flowers bloomed and bees and drones hummed very jubilantly, humming. While the birds, trees and branches were all looking happy, Krishna, tending the cows, accompanied by Balaram and the cowherd boys, began to vibrate his transcendental flute. After hearing, this first time. After hearing the vibration of the flute of Krishna, the gopis in Vrindavan remembered him and began to talk amongst themselves about how nicely Krishna was playing his flute. When the gopis were describing the sweet vibration of Krishna's flute, they also remembered their pastimes with him. Thus their minds became disturbed and they were unable to describe completely the beautiful vibrations. While discussing the transcendental vibration, They remembered how Krishna dressed, decorated with a peacock feather on his head, just like a dancing actor, and with blue flowers pushed over his ears. His garment glowed yellow gold, and he was garlanded with a Vaijayanti necklace. Dressed in such an attractive way, Krishna filled up the holes of his flute with the nectar emanating from his lips. They remembered him entering the forest of Vrindavan, which is always glorified by the footprints of Krishna and his companions. Wouldn't you love to see that? Krishna's footprints on the soft, soft dust. Krishna was very expert in playing his flute, and the gopis were captivated by the sound vibration, which was not only attractive to them, but to all living creatures who heard it. A gopi expressed her opinion that Krishna and Balaram, while tending the cows, appeared just like actors going to play on a dramatic stage. Krishna was dressed in glowing garments of yellow, Balaram in blue, and they held new twigs of mango tree, peacock feathers, and bunches of flowers in their hands. So that was their little bunch there. There was twigs of a mango tree, peacock feathers, and bunches of flowers. Dressed with garlands of lotus flowers, they were sometimes singing very sweetly among their friends. One gopi said, "My dear friend, we cannot even think of the bamboo flute. What sort of pious activities did it execute so that it is now enjoying the nectar of Krishna's lips? How is it possible that the flute, which is nothing but a bamboo rod, is always engaged in enjoying the nectar of Krishna's lips? Because the flute is engaged in the service of the Supreme Lord, the mother and father of the flute must be very happy. The lakes and the rivers are considered to be the mothers of the trees because the trees live simply by drinking water. The waters of the lakes and rivers of Vrindavan were full of happy lotus flowers. Happy lotus flowers. Because the waters were thinking, how is it our son, the bamboo rod, is enjoying the nectar of Krishna's lips? The bamboo trees standing by the banks of the rivers and the lakes were also happy to see their descendants so engaged in the service of the Lord. So just that one flute caused so much happiness to so many there in Vrindavan. The trees were overwhelmed with joy and were incessantly yielding honey, which flowed from the beehives hanging on the branches. One gopi spoke, "When Govinda plays his flute, the peacocks immediately become mad. When all the animals and trees and plants, either on the top of Govardhan Hill or in the valley, when they see the dancing of the peacock, they all stand still to hear the transcendental sound of the flute with great attention. We think that this boon is not possible or available on any other planet." Although the gopis were village cowherd girls, they had knowledge of Krishna. Similarly, one can learn the highest truths simply by hearing the Vedas from authoritative sources. Another gopi said, "My dear friends, just see the deer. Although they are dumb animals," meaning they can't speak, "they have approached the son of Maharaj Nanda, Krishna. Not only are they attracted by the dress of Krishna and Balaram, but as soon as they hear the playing of the flute, the deer, along with their husbands, offer respectful obeisances unto the Lord by looking at him with great affection." Another gopi said, "Even the wives of the denizens of heaven become attracted after hearing the transcendental sound of his flute. although they are traveling in the air in their airplanes, enjoying the company of their husbands, on hearing the sound of Krishna's flute, they immediately become perturbed. It means they become disturbed. They can't think of anything else. This means that the transcendental sound of the flute of Krishna was heard in all corners of the universe. Another gopi said to her friends, "My dear friends, the cows are also charmed as soon as they hear the transcendental sound of the flute of Krishna. It sounds to them like the pouring of nectar, and they immediately spread their long ears just to catch the liquid nectar of the flute. As for the calves, they remain struck with devotion when they hear the sound of the flute, and tears glide down from their eyes, illustrating vividly how they are embracing Krishna heart to heart." A younger gopi told her mother, "My dear mother, the birds who are all looking at Krishna playing on his flute are sitting very attentively on the branches and twigs of different trees. From their features, it appears that they have forgotten everything and are engaged only in hearing Krishna's flute. This proves that they are not ordinary birds. They are great sages and devotees, and just to hear Krishna's flute, they have appeared in Vrindavan forest as birds." Amazing. Even the river Jamuna, being desirous to embrace the lotus feet of Krishna after hearing the transcendental vibration of his flute, broke her fierce waves to flow very nicely with lotus flowers in her hands, just to present flowers to Mukunda with deep feelings. The scorching heat of the autumn sunshine was sometimes intolerable, and therefore the clouds in the sky appeared above Krishna and Balaram and their friends while they engaged in blowing their flutes. The clouds served as a soothing umbrella over their heads, just to make friendship with Krishna. Another gopi said that everything appeared wonderful when Krishna and Balaram travelled in the forest of Vrindavan, playing their flutes and making intimate friendship with all kinds of moving and non-moving living entities. In spite of their being the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna and Balaram played exactly like cowherd boys, and therefore everything became wonderful and attractive. So I have placed a link below this with this story there, and you can count up how many times in the story that I found the word hear, hearing or heard. So I hope you enjoyed that. And now we'll finish off with just a few minutes of hearing Krishna's names sung by his dear devotee. Namaste.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Bol. Louder, louder. Hare Bol. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Bol. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Bol. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Bol. Hare Bol.